Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us on this beautiful Sunday. It's such a great pleasure to welcome Preston Singletary here at the Speed Museum tonight, and also some children of Leonard and Adele Leight, who pulled together one of the most significant collection of contemporary glass art. So they very much were looking for artists who express themselves uniquely in the medium of glass. And if you haven't had a chance, please go upstairs to the second floor. There is one of Preston's pieces displayed there. So thank you to, of course, Adele and Leonard Leight for making this lecture possible. And then also for Scott to bring Preston here. Preston Singleton is a truly remarkable, extraordinary artist who works in the Seattle area and has spent his life investigating how to combine the deep heritage of his Tlingit culture with the medium of glass. And the medium of glass is not, or is foreign to Native American culture. And his work, his process, his investigation is in that tension between the ancient symbols of the Tlingit culture and their relationship to nature and the medium of glass. So it's going to be phenomenal to hear from him today. And I want to thank all of you again for being here, and then also welcome very warmly all of the members of our Speed Design group. So thank you so much, and I want to welcome Scott Urbis, our Curator of Decorative Arts, to introduce Preston a little bit more formally. Thank you.
Well, welcome everyone. I'm so glad to all see you here in person. Before we begin, I just ask that we all please silence our cell phones. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the 9th iteration of the Adele and Leonard Leight series, Art, Design, and Innovation. This was a program near and dear to Adele and Leonard's heart, but actually conceived and endowed by their children, Jenna, Jonathan, and Peter, who are with us today. And I'm even more excited to announce for the first time publicly that Jenna, Jonathan, and Peter have further established and endowed what will be known as the Adele and Leonard Leight Glass Art Award. This will be a biennial competitive acquisition focused on emerging and new artists working in glass. This will launch in 2024, so stay tuned. But I think it's so important that Leonard and Adele's lives as collectors, their support for artists is continuing. So thank you very much, Jenna, Jonathan, and Peter. Now, I have to say, this iteration of the series is a little bittersweet for me, and I think for all of us who knew Adele and Leonard. This is the first in-person lecture since Leonard passed away in March of 2021, and I know I speak for all of us here who knew them. You know, we miss their warmth, their amazing senses of humor, but especially their incredible eyes and intelligence as collectors. And having said that, though, I'm so pleased that we're welcoming Preston today, because Preston's work, Raven's Other Form, which Rafaela mentioned, is on view on the floor above us. It was among Leonard's last acquisitions. And when we unpacked the piece in the living room at the house and brought it out, Leonard was thrilled. And he immediately proclaimed it beautiful in his equally beautiful Bronx accent. And that was like the pinnacle. Beautiful was the stamp, gold stamp of approval. And in fact, Preston's piece ended up in the front hall of the house, which is another place of honor. Well, as Rafaela mentioned, Preston is based in Seattle, where he began working with glass in the early 1980s in the ferment of Seattle's very innovative glass scene. He mastered the techniques associated with European glassmaking, but of course, put those to the cause of documenting, communicating, representing his own Tlingit heritage. And in that regard, Preston is now clearly one of the leading contemporary Indigenous artists in this country. And as he puts it, what it's about is, quote, declaring who we are through our art in connection to our cultures. So today, Preston will share with us Eagle's journey with Raven. And won't you please welcome me in welcoming Preston.
Well, thank you all for being here. It's wonderful to see so many people in person, and let's get started here. I had a couple of quick stories about when I first came to Louisville. I think it was 1999. And there was an exhibition for the Kentucky Arts and Crafts Center. Brian Klinkingbeard was here, and he curated a show called Head, Heart, and Hands. And at that time, my career was just coming up. I wasn't as established as I am today, but it was my first time here. And I did meet Leonard and Adele. Because I was the glass guy in the group, they said, come over to our house, and so I did, and they showed me around, and I was really impressed with to see some of the pieces again today. Several of those pieces I saw, and Adele, she asked me, "So, are you married to a Native American woman?" And I said, "No, I married a Swedish woman from Sweden." And she said, "Oh, you should have been much more careful of who you fell in love with." And I was like, well, okay. I couldn't be angry with her because she was such a charming person, a wonderful lady, who I saw later at the Glass Arts Society conference in Florida. And it was probably about 5 years later. And we bumped into each other. And we were waiting in a buffet line. And she said, I was subject of an attempted carjacking. This man opened up my door, and he slid into my car, and I fell on my back, and I started kicking him until he fell out of the car, and then he ran away. I was like, wow, okay. I think she was like in her 70s at that point or something. So anyway, my Adele and Leonard stories there. So here we go. Eagle's journey with Raven. I am from the Tlingit tribe. I'm from the Eagle. The tribe is split into two halves. It's Eagle or Raven. So I'm born in a matrilineal connection is to the Eagle side of the tribe. And then by tribal law, you would marry over to the Raven side. I grew up in Seattle, away from the Tlingit community. And this is some of my traditional regalia that I would wear in a ceremony. And it's Sitka, Alaska, is where my great-grandmother came from. The Kagwantan and Killer Whale clan. This is my wife, the Swedish gal. And we've been married for 27 years. I'd like to give a little credit to my folks, my parents, who were quite creative and dabbled in many different things. Here, my father was a great outdoorsman, fly fisherman, and he worked for Boeing for 40 years. But he always dabbled in lots of things and was very well-read man, and didn't travel a lot, but was really book smart and really dabbled in painting and poetry and calligraphy and doing, and my mother and he both played Delta blues and sang folk songs, and my mom did a lot of handicrafts. So I grew up really more or less thinking that I could do anything I want. Why would I want to limit myself when you can express yourself in so many different ways? So it was May 18th, 1980, the eruption of Mount St. Helens. This is what I always like to refer to as what fostered my glass career. This was some of the artists in the Seattle area took the ash from the mountain, from the volcano, and melted it and made glass from it. And that factory grew rather quickly, and I started working there. But my main passion was music. So this was what I was pretty much hanging my hat on, out of high school, that I was going to be a rock star, that was the box that I checked when it was, chosen profession. But it didn't really pan out for me at that time, so I kind of fell back on my art career, which really started with this guy, Dante Marioni, who is also a well-known glass artist. And then you might recognize Lino Tagliapietra in the center there. So we befriended him, and I met him 2 years after I started blowing glass. Or no, it was actually the second year after I started blowing glass, 1983. And we watched him work, and Dante and I tried to mimic those techniques, Italian goblet making techniques. And I ended up, after the factory work, where I got my initial training, I started working with Benjamin Moore. And so I worked with Benjamin for about 20 years with this studio and some of these folks here that are in the studio. Here we're working for Dan Daly, and Richard Royal is there. So we were a team that worked for lots of different people. And that's how I basically acquired all of my experience in glass making, through working with other artists. Here is the Museum of Glass, doing a residency there. That's in Tacoma, Washington, south of Seattle. But the Tlingit way was calling me, and I was looking for an opportunity to find my own direction with the material of glass. And so I looked to my cultural background. So my great-grandmother is the woman that's pictured here in the center of the photo. And she grew up, obviously the time of great change, and she was married to a man and then she was widowed. She had 4 children, and then she met this guy here, Dionisio Gubatayo, who was a Filipino man, and she left the community. She left Sitka and moved to Seattle and took with her all the kids, including my grandmother, and so that's who I knew as my great-grandfather. And they lived in Seattle till the end of her days, and she lived to be 100 years old. So we did spend a fair amount of time with her, holidays and what have you. So that's what sort of put the idea in my head to conjoin the cultural perspective to the glass. So this, fast forwarding to current times here, this was Raven in the Box of Daylight. This is currently at the Smithsonian, the National Museum of the American Indian. So this actually, this originated at the Museum of Glass, and it's currently traveling. It will go to Charlotte, Norfolk, Virginia, to the Chrysler Museum. So this, as you can see, I wanted to show you a little bit of the narrative I tried to create here is about Raven in the beginning of time when the world was in darkness, and so I animated some aspects of the exhibition with video and also created a soundscape. So getting back to my musical roots there. And so Raven in the beginning of time is a white bird, and he goes to, he's trying to find out where the daylight is. So he goes to the fishermen of the night and he asks, where's the daylight? And the fishermen of the night tell him of this old man who lives at the head of the Nass River, and he has the daylight in his clan house. So this is the old man. So I'm iterating the entire story with glass objects, and as you can follow the whole thread of the story by going through the exhibition. And so he talks about a daughter who drinks, who in this case she's transparent. So this also symbolizes a supernatural being in the story. Now I'm going to cut a little bit to the early work because I was trying to create this to show a little bit of the journey of Raven and kind of the journey of my career. So this is some of the earliest work that I did that I made and put in galleries. Actually, the first pieces, they're pretty large blown vessel forms. And then these I made actually after I met my wife and spent some time in Scandinavia. And I think that they kind of have a bit of a Scandinavian sensibility to them. But always back to the kind of the Italian and modernism kind of perspective based on the people that I was working with and for and influenced by. So these, I call these the Prestonuzzi vases, these series. You know, inspired by Napoleon Martinuzzi was the Italian designer. So anyway, so a lot of this was quite influential on me. This is one of the first pieces, not this actual piece, but this format was a piece that I made when I started to work on the native designs. And I do all this work with the sandblasting process. So you have to imagine a rubber stencil, cutting out the rubber stencil, or drawing on it and cutting it out, revealing areas to be sand carved. And then that's where you get the matte and shiny. And that's where you get the shadow effect. And I discovered it purely by accident. My aunt was really excited that I was working with the Tlingit designs. And when I worked with Benjamin, we used to have a holiday open house, and Benjamin would have these beautiful pedestals with like really nice lights above them, and we, the assistants, would have like a little card table over in the corner. And my aunt said, "Well, can we look at the hat form with, you know, on the nice pedestal with the light?" And I said, "Sure." So we took Benny's piece down, and I put my piece up, and about 10 people had gathered around to see what was going to happen. And when I put it on the pedestal and the shadows fell through, everybody's like, "Oh, look at that." And I said, "Well, yeah, that's what I intended all along, you know." Of course, that was the aha moment for me. And that's how really I got, you know, into this. And I realized there was a kind of a spirit behind the pieces that's revealed. So just a little bit about, you know, the things that motivate me and the things that inspired me. You know, Carlos Castaneda was a big thing in the 80s, and we all read the books, and it was, in the end, it was all kind of debunked, and he had fabricated a lot of these stories, but there's a lot there. And part of it was about the imagination of navigating within your dream time. And so that's something that, as silly as it was, or I mean, some people think it's really incredible, these books, and I still believe that they are incredible. It led me to start to think about different things in regards to dream analysis and psychology. And of course, Joseph Campbell was a big proponent of like this mythology and these stories that are really, really important that guide us as human beings from our given cultures. And so this was the something that he had sort of mapped out as these archetypes. And so the call to adventure, the finding of mentors, the conflict and the resolution and the eventual, you know, achievement, you know, and pretty much every archetype that we have, every storytelling that we have is like Star Wars. Okay, it's the same thing. Luke Skywalker loses his parents, and he has to find Obi-Wan Kenobi, and then he becomes this mighty, you know, warrior. Okay, or Wizard of Oz. You know, I mean, these are all common. So this is my own personal call to adventure. The Pilchuck Glass School, this was the year after I was in Louisville. I was working on this project with my friends from Alaskan Indian Arts, and David Svensson was one of the guys that really noticed me doodling with these designs, and he explained to me he had lived and worked with the Tlingit community up in Haines, and so we brought the idea of doing a totem pole to represent the story of the founders of the Pilchuck Glass School. So, and for many reasons, John Halberg, who is the main patron of the school, was the heir to Weyerhaeuser, and he was a passionate Northwest Coast native art collector. And he had donated the land where Pilchuck is situated. So we wanted to erect this, cedar monument representing the wood, the native culture, there on the campus. And so we created this story around, so that's what totem poles are supposed to do. They're supposed to tell a story. That was what their purpose was. So we worked in the winter of 2000 and then 2001 in August we went up to the campus and taught a class surrounding the completion of the totem pole. And so this was the one and only contribution that I had. I didn't carve a piece of the log, but the master carvers came down from Alaska and they got to play around with glass, and it was an amazing thing. For me, it was like a rite of passage. For me, it was like I had a moment of deja vu, which was like, of course, when you have that, it kind of made me feel as though I was in the right place doing what I should be doing. And so being up on the campus with this Tlingit people and the elders that came down to do the dedication, it was really incredible. And when they were singing this song, it hit me. And so as a campus, we all came together and we carried this totem to its installation site, and it's there on the campus. And if I forgot to mention that David is a skilled carver, but he's also a neon artist. So we created these castings that we inlaid into the pole and then backlit with neon. So it's a pretty cutting edge project, as it was 22 years ago. So this was a dagger that was Halberg had collected, but then repatriated to a community up in Alaska, and it was given a Tlingit name, Guchkiates, which means dark wolf. And so because he had given this dagger back to the community, he was honored with a Tlingit name. So for all these reasons, we made a totem pole to represent him. And then the top figure is Annie Halberg, the wife of John Halberg. And then you have Dale Chihuly with this sort of vision of glass. Of course, we didn't represent it as an eye patch. He's holding on to the wings of the raven who brought daylight to the world, and it's sort of like Dale Chihuly brought the idea of Pilchuck to the world. So continuing on with my Joseph Campbell adventure here, so what to me it was awakening this what I call a genetic memory. This was something that is really something that I when I placed myself on this path, I never looked back, and it's become the most fulfilling thing that I could have done. So Jung, of course, was very deep into dream analysis, so it ties into the Carlos Castaneda thing, and then I studied Aikido for a time, which was also quite an interesting blending of Zen philosophies, but in the context of martial art. But it was also the way what I equated it with was the action of moving with an opposing force in the form of glass. So you move your body to move with this material. And so I found myself moving differently with the blowpipe. And so that's what, for me, all these little things are things that are components of the way that I think about my life journey. And so then I met Joe David actually in the summer of 2000. And he became a mentor. He kind of introduced me to the sweat lodge ceremony. We went up to the Pilchuck Glass School and we built a sweat lodge up there, and I was really apprehensive. I didn't know what was going to happen. When we go up to Pilchuck, there's people from all around the world. There's about 100 people on the campus, and Joe said, I want to do this suffering and sacrifice ceremony up on the hill. And those of you who are interested, come and talk to me. And after looking into your eyes and telling you what you need to know, I'll let you know if you're ready to do this. And so I was like, okay, Joe, look into my eyes and tell me, am I ready to do this? And he says, well, let me put it this way. He says, you better be. And I said, okay. And he said, well, Preston, you're my number one guy. So he actually, at the end of that session, we did 4 sweat lodges, which are quite involved. And they just really result in like personal growth is the best way to put it. But he adopted me and shared his name with me, which is something that on the coast is... You might receive different names throughout your lifetime depending on the change of, you might become the leader of a house group, for instance, and then you'd assume an ancestral name. So in this case, he was validating me to some degree as an artist, and that's the way I look at it. And then there's Walter Porter, who is from Yakutat, and he's the mythologist that helped me with the Raven story. And shed a lot of light on it, and talked about the metaphors and the symbolism behind the story. So back to the Raven story. So Raven is this white bird. But he can assume different forms. So he changed himself into a speck of dirt. He floated down this stream, and the daughter scooped him up in this ladle. But because she's of high status within the community, she has attendants with her. So they take this feather and they draw it through the water and they see the dirt, so they cast it out. And so Raven then reformulates his plan, and this time he transforms himself into a hemlock needle. So I created this mobile with the different elements of, wings and feathers and feet and the beak of the bird, and it's sort of floating around, symbolizing the transformation of Raven. So this time he transforms himself into a hemlock needle, floats down the stream. She scoops it up. She doesn't see it, and she swallows it, and then Raven is now inside of her in the form of this hemlock needle, and he transforms himself into this human child. So a baby, and so this is Raven transforming inside the girl's belly. And when it comes time to give birth, she's having a hard time giving birth. They usually, in the old days, they would dig a pit out behind the clan house, and they would line it with these fine furs, and then the baby would be born. She was having trouble with the birth, and so a medicine woman comes by and says, take the furs away and replace it with moss. And so once they did that, the child was born naturally and easily. And so this was the idea that, that Raven is transforming here in this piece. Is this? I thought that was a video. Anyways, so this piece is the, kind of this spirit rising out of this hat, this form. And so now Raven is inside the clan house, and so that's how he gets into the clan house. And he's a very precocious and mischievous child. He is always looking around inside the clan house. He's looking for the daylight. So my accomplishments are not my own, but those of many. This was a Maori proverb that when I was working with some of the Maoris down there, I really loved that. It really talks about the intergenerational connection. The people that came, the ancestors that came before me were the ones that I'm inspired by, and hopefully I'm passing that on to the next generation of artists, Tlingit artists. But these are all the folks that helped me in my studio in various capacities, either glass blowing or cutting of the stencil, sandblasting. So now I'm going to show you a quick, okay, I got to get, I'm in danger of oversharing here, but I've got a lot of stuff to show you. the work that is reflective of different cultural objects, traditional objects. This is a quite fairly large box, but these bent wood chests. This is a full-scale canoe paddle. This is one of the most complex forms that I do, made up of several different glass, sculpted glass pieces. Some of them are sandblasted and then heated back up and brought together in various ways. This is sort of an homage to basketry and the design work and the symmetry of those pieces. This is an oyster catcher rattle. This is a form that is a traditional shaman's rattle. So all of these pieces are inspired by, objects that maybe reside in museums or, made for ceremonial use. Killer whale ancestor mask. Another version of a ladle here. So now now Raven is inside the clan house, and he is, he's looking through these objects, all of these treasures that are owned by the man, what we call at'u. These are things that are heirlooms that are passed on through generations to represent the clans, to represent the community, to represent that particular house. And so some of these would be used for ceremony. Some of these would be, used for utilitarian purposes. So the first box that Raven comes up to this box, and he's playing with this box, and he opens it up, and he sees what's inside. It's the stars. So he takes the stars, and he tosses them through the smoke hole in the center of the clan house, and they take their place in the sky. Next, he comes to this, so he's punished and reprimanded. The grandfather is pretty disappointed that, he's thrown these precious objects away. So he's watching this boy now, and so he's playing with this other box. But when no one's looking, he opens up the box and he sees this moon, and he takes it and he tosses it through this smoke hole in the sky, in the ceiling, and it takes its place in the sky. And so this time, the old man is really, really disappointed, and so the kid's really in trouble, and so he's reprimanded and punished. And when it comes to the final box, the box that contains the sun, the old man's like, no, not this time. And so this child starts to cry and fuss and scream and yell and stomp, and and this goes on for days and days, and everyone's getting exhausted. And he gets weak because he hasn't been eating, and he's like laying on the ground. And so the daughter comes to the father, her father, and says, Father, is there anything more important than your grandson? And he says, well, of course you're right. So he puts the box down, and Raven, then he transforms back into a bird form, and he takes the sun, and he takes off through the smoke hole, and the soot from the smoke hole turns Raven black, and that's how he becomes a blackbird. So with the breaking of the daylight, what happens is that the people were all in darkness all together. It was a very confusing time. They couldn't see things, and they didn't know, what was going on. And so this flash of light, some of them scatter off into the woods. They become the animals of the forest. Some of them jump into the water, and they become the sea life. Some of them jumped into the sky, and they became the birds. And the people that, stood there strong and powerful, or the antithesis of that could be bewildered and not knowing what to do, became the human beings. So, so they all of a sudden they are in this illuminated world, and they can see everything for the first time. And so all of these objects represent the different clans that would have adopted these animal symbols. And so, just really quickly, metaphors of the Raven story. The world's going from dark to light. It's kind of like, in theology, you would say Jesus is the light. The thing I'm trying to figure out around this is the idea of myth has two meanings. It can be a story, a cultural story, but it also means something that is untrue. So I'm kind of preparing for this TED Talk that I'm supposed to be preparing for. So I'm testing all these ideas out in a presentation format. As Joseph Campbell said, and Walter Porter said, is the importance of storytelling is this process of imaging. Before we had moving pictures and movies to watch and like this, we had an ability to unlock creative thought and creative intent, in the form of objects and making art. And this is what the elders did. They listened to these songs over and over and over, and they would think in pictures. They'd have to visualize through the word. They would have to visualize it in your mind, and that is changing in today's society. So, Walter used to do these great tricks. He goes, well, what happens when you're in a comic book, somebody gets a good idea. What happens? What happens above their head? A light bulb pops up. So this is how he was showing me that these metaphors for knowledge and enlightenment were all embedded in this story. And so, of course, we get into the theological sort of idea around it. The daughter, this is a virgin birth. It signifies a spiritual being, the idea of immaculate conception. The type of birth, so she was having a hard time giving birth. Medicine woman says change out the materials that the baby is going to be born on, and it symbolizes a humble birth. So instead of being born onto the furs, born onto the moss. And so all of these things are... and he could go on and on and on about these concepts. But these stories, they teach forgiveness. They teach all kinds of stories that or human qualities that we all can understand. The water is a metaphor, a symbol of the subconscious. It's a symbol of purification. In the sweat lodge, we pour water onto the hot stones, and we sweat, and it's a form of cleansing, our minds and our body. Water is used in baptism. So a lot of these things are all what the story symbolizes. And I'm going to just kind of keep blasting through here because I've got other things I wanted to talk about that kind of inform my approach to making art. I allow surrealism, modernism, primitivism to, kind of inform a little bit of what I do. When I was trying to figure out what my own path with the material and the culture, I really, surrealism was the first thing. I didn't go to college for art, so that was one thing that I felt was really interesting because of all the psychoanalysis of, the symbolism within the artwork, which led to, also modernism, the modernists that were reflecting on older cultures, African cultures, Native American cultures, and then making art that was inspired by it. And it led to this genre called primitivism, which was highlighted at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And there's a 2-volume catalog that has a lot of it. It's very inspiring for me to think about what the modernists were doing when they were looking at this artwork. So I tried to, turn the tables on the modernists a little bit. So like a Brancusi becomes like this, fish form for me. Here you have, a Picasso and Haida mask. This is, so I think that a lot of this was happening in these, at that time of, discovery and the European artists looking at these kinds of objects. So this is my sort of modernist phase. This is how I kind of liberally interpret these spare organic forms, and then I adorn them with Northwest Coast design. And they all have, poetic titles which kind of, refer to some idea that I have, how I express. This is called Bear Woman. This one is called I Have Not Slept. This is a shaman figure who's kind of going through a ritual. So a lot of these pieces are just really trying to play with these simple gestural forms and then trying to figure out how to design onto that space. So it's a pretty broad range of pieces here. This is a more recent one, so this is more of an obvious nod to modernism with this mobile, Calder inspired. But Indigenous artist gatherings are another thing I've been involved with for several years, traveling to Hawaii, New Zealand, Australia, and exchanging ideas and time with these communities. And sometimes we come together, we're about 100 artists, and we're sharing our culture and dabbling in other mediums and learning the haka. Here's my looking like a Maori warrior here. But the Maori are incredible people. They are very educated and progressive in their art, and in some cases we'll have a glass furnace there at the gathering site and kind of share with them the glass making. So I do some collaborations over the years. I've done with collaborations with several different Indigenous artists, and this is Jody Naranjo. These are this one's actually Tammy Garcia, Santa Clara Pueblo potter, and so each time I'm working with these artists, I'm letting them kind of take the fore in what we make, and then So I'm, thereby trying to help them understand what the possibilities of glass would be for their work. So these are all Harlan Riano. She's a sculptor and a painter. This is Jamboa Morwili. He's Australian Aboriginal. He came up to visit me in December, and I think he saw snow for the first time. That was pretty wild. So anyway, this was, as I work with other artists, I learn how they interpret their own culture for today's commercial, for gallery, for selling through galleries. Because a lot of these, we all have like sacred objects or symbols that we wouldn't necessarily represent in an art piece. And in my case, it would probably be like a clan object or a design that was representing a specific clan. These are pieces I did with Joe David, who, again, I mentioned was my mentor. And so these ones are pretty special because of, kind of the apprentice and the teacher. Lewis Gardner was a Maori jade carver. And this is, so we'd look at stories that we shared that were, he's got the Whale Rider, and then we also have the creator of Killer Whale in Natslane is the one that is often shown riding on the back of a killer whale. And so the green here, as you can see, maybe is jade stone. So that's carved stone, and then it's put together with the glass sculpture. This is the salmon mother myth. And then I get to work with guys like this. And Marcus is Choctaw. He's also a bead worker. And these are representative of his mound builder culture materials. And then there's Raven Sky River. He was also Tlingit, and he's a very talented sculptor making these whales and sea life, these sculptures. And then so we've started, I started putting some design work on some of the pieces that he's already known for. So, killer whale, mother and calf. And then Lisa Telford was a weaver of cedar bark and spruce root. But getting back to the music, which you knew I would, this was, I called this one Blind Raven and Howling Wolf. I made this as a fundraiser object for the Mopop now. It used to be the Music Museum in, okay. Sorry, that was out of place. I dropped these in the wrong order. But I have a video in the end, so I'm going to kind of go quickly here so we can get to that. This was a 8-foot sculpture, lost wax casting. This was the first one I did. This one actually represents my great-grandmother who had a pet grizzly bear as a child. Talked about her earlier. About 2,000 pounds of glass. There it is. Again, trying to get the monumental, I wanted to share that because I've been getting into public art and doing monumental works, painting on glass. This was up in Alaska at the Boney Courthouse. This is in Portland. And this is outside our new remodeled sports stadium where the Kraken play, the Seattle hockey team. And we didn't know at the time that the Kraken was going to be the mascot, but so they selected this. So we got that right outside Climate Pledge Arena. This was for a cultural arts center in Juneau, Alaska. So getting some of the work back into the home community was really a big thing for me, and really special that they commissioned me to do this triptych here, the 2 house posts and the wall screen. Okay, now we're talking about music. This was we've done this group, we've done these albums, 4 albums, triple LPs. Ku'ik is the name of the group, and that means potlatch in the Tlingit language. We worked with this amazing guy named Bernie Worrell, who was a keyboard player for Parliament Funkadelic. And I met him in 2013, and he came to Seattle. I paid into a Kickstarter campaign, but then we befriended each other and just started work together on all this music. And it's kind of, so my particular interest in music is funk and soul, dance music. And so this was an amazing opportunity because he's created some of the most iconic music that is sampled by pretty much all the rappers, and sort of repopularized his music, but was, of course he was given little to no credit around it. But so anyway, all these people, lot of them are, Native. We were about 6 Native Americans in the group, and then we work collaboratively with jazz musicians. And just amazing. So we're typically a 10-piece band, and I'm going to go right through to the end here because I have a little snippet of a video. I probably won't play the whole thing, but so we lost Clarissa in 2016 and Bernie as well in 2016, but we carry on as a group, and it sounds kind of like this.
From the new album, Wooch!
Wooch! Hey, we're bringing a brother up here, a nephew. This is our nephew here. Air Jazz.
Achuni! Achat! Who ich, for whom I speak. Let's take a double peek. If confidence is key, don't be confidential. Like under compliments, so you got potential of going continental. We're unity, you and me, using these communities. Usually some mutiny to achieve peace. Orbit and north with the form of revenge. Proportionate to divorce, don't go over the edge. Equality is out their league, they can warm up the bench. When they want to see you speak, they will board your ship. Ku-ik, North Star, higher than the pulsar. Higher when you're cold hard, quicker than a sports car. North Star, you are the avatar. Turn to pass an after party, don't need the alcohol. Ku-ik, Ku-ik, that is for whom I speak. Ku-ik, Ku-ik, this is performance of the week. Yeah.
Oh, this is spiritual warfare. Prayer warriors, get ready. Solana Suju's hot eye.
Jewe kich, akle duch sakik. Yakuik, antawanadu yusling kitch kaflik. Would you kunnak just got kunnak nigga why you kunnak Dutch punch? Do got entity, would khande outity. It's a khand to cut you on, could khayana ha. Let adak la gun, done a duck wussy ton. Siku wo yagi yi ha ani Toots khand lekina, it's a khand Ku-ik, for whom I speak. This is performance of the week,
This is spiritual warfare.
spiritual. Warfare. Spiritual warfare. None of us want to go there, but we must do what we must do for the ones yet to come here. Each and every one of us has a duty here tonight. If you're listening, use your heart and do that shit right. Educate the next generation up and coming and lift them up with everything that you got and do something. Don't just stand back and be like, oh, that's so sad, man. Rise up and do what you can. Hey!
We go higher,
Get ready, get ready, get ready, rise up.
Do what you can.
Rise up, rise up, rise up. Get ready, rise up, rise up.
Do what you can.
Do the work now. Do the work now. Do the work now.
Had to get that one in. Anyway, thank you. Yeah, sure. I've got to rush off to the airport in about 30 minutes, but I got time to answer some questions,
Any questions?
if there are any. The music we've been writing music since about 2013, and we make LPs, and we have 4 triple albums and a 5th one on the way. But it's all self-produced stuff.
Do you have any plans for a new direction in your art? And how is that going to combine with your music?
Actually, I'm thinking of I have the recording engineer that I've been working with has this new technology which you can sort of place sound in the room in various ways, so it kind of interacts with human presence. And so I have so I've been so fixated on this whole Raven story, but I was kind of wondering, like, what else did Raven do? Like, so if the culture had not been, interrupted, then that creativity would have continued. And so when are the next stories of Raven going to be allowed into the, into the history, the Tlingit history? So I'm thinking, like, Raven's maybe trying to fight climate change, or maybe he's trying to find the, maybe he found the residential school graves, or maybe he's looking for missing and murdered Indigenous women. So there's all these contemporary stories or contemporary issues that face our community. And so I think that there's an opportunity to be creative with that and sort of talk about it in like new Raven stories. So that's what I'm working on.
I was wondering about the quick thing you said about your grandmother who had a pet grizzly. And I wanted to know if there were any stories that went with that.
So actually, I don't think it was a grizzly. I always catch myself saying that. It was probably a brown bear or a black bear. But there's that. I don't know that grizzlies are actually in Alaska. I mean, they've got... No, anyways, so the story goes that there was a family that was hunting, and they shot a bear, and presumably the mother, and then they found these little cubs that were rooting around, and so picked them up and brought them back to the village. And so my great-grandmother, Susie Johnson, she raised it as a pet. And it was a time, at the turn of the century, there was a lot of Russians in Sitka at that time. And so there was a woman that made saltwater taffy, and she would sell it kind of in stores or on the street or whatever. And so my great-grandmother would go out and pick berries so she could sell them, so she could get Russian money to buy taffy for her little bear. So that's the story. And so I've been telling this story for 20 years, and nobody asked, like, well, what happened after that? And so I started to, and then I finally asked my family, well, yeah, what happened after that? Because that was just like, oh, the taffy, haha. Anyway, so somebody came by and told, that at some point the bear got too big to keep around the house. It was tied up behind the house, apparently. And so somebody took it and donated it to a zoo. That's the end. What's that?
Is this a sample of myth?
Yeah.
Oh. Hi, I was just wondering how tall the raven sculpture was. Right after it was born, the blue one.
Oh, the totem form.
After Raven came out of the daughter's belly, that there was a blue.
That piece.
Elongated.
It was, it's about, the hat form was like this big. It was a big hat, and then that little sculpture above it. It stands about this high.
Okay.
Yeah, that's however high that is, 4 feet or so. Yeah.
Thanks.
Maybe we'll do one more question and. Yeah.
In your creative process, you have an intention with a piece. How does that change as you actually work on the piece and it evolves?
Well, there's a lot of directions that I approach it from. Like sometimes I'll just make a blown glass form that I think is interesting because I'm very process oriented, and so I have all these objects kind of laying in my storeroom on shelves, and then when I want to make a show, I'll pick a group of them out and think that they'll look good together, and so then some days I don't know what I'm doing exactly. I'll just start to put a line down, and then I'll kind of start to fill it out. So it's kind of like an adventure. Every day's an adventure. Some days I'll go in with very specific idea what I wanted to do, like when I'm building the show, that I'm trying to create this narrative. But sometimes the piece will reveal itself like much later. Sometimes there's a piece that's been sitting around for 10 years, and then I finally see something in the piece, and I think, oh, I can make this into that or whatever. So, I go through the whole spectrum of like mythology and the idea of, animism, transformation. I try to, bring some, the idea of kind of a spiritual power around it. That's what my intent is. And again, representing my my cultural background, my community, and then sometimes I can get more kind of poetic with it, and the object might reflect the intent, within the title of the piece. So it kind of goes all directions for me, and it's different every day.
Thank you so much, Preston, for being here on behalf of SPAT. Thank you.